Very clearly, Gluck is the musician hero whose art has removed him from the vulgar realm of the bourgeois and has raised him to the level where the mystery of the world and of his soul are known to him, as they are not to the narrator, if there really is a narrator separate from the musician. A host of questions arises. Is this chance acquaintance really not predetermined? Is the musician merely a madman who sees himself as Gluck? Is the madman really Gluck? Is he perhaps a reincarnation of Gluck? Is it possible, after all, that the narrator and Gluck are only one and the same and hence exist in two worlds simultaneously, the external world of reality and the inner romantic world of the spirit? But what is this reality? We are told in the beginning of the story that what follows took place in 1809. However, we know that the composer Gluck died in 1787. How could Gluck, according to our standards of reality, find himself in Weber's cafe in Berlin 22 years after his death? Perhaps one could argue there is no Gluck. It is the narrator who is insanely imagining that he exists. But Hoffmann convinces us that this man is Gluck, for he tells us as much himself in the very last line of the story with the italicized, "I am Ritter Gluck." All in all, as in much of Hoffmann, we are left with one satisfactory conclusion. The world itself has more than one reality, and different realities may coexist at exactly the same moment. This being so, the world we thought we knew so well is undermined. This is a seminal story. The fantastic takes place in an accurate and contemporary setting. The whole question of, quote, doubleness, end of quote, is raised. Through music, the spirit is seen as communicating with the divine. The attack upon the premise that there is but one reality is made. The imaginative, gaining strength because it overlays the prosaic, is already in full power. It has indeed been argued that Hoffmann not only may never have written a better story than this, his first, but that his basic technique advanced little. This, of course, is moot. What seems to be an argument more readily substantiated is that Hoffmann the musician was never truly important because his music never got to the level of Mozart's and Gluck's, the two composers so praised in this story. This story may also be, as a German critic maintains, the key to an understanding not only of Hoffmann, but of many of the literary works to follow, because we see in Ritter Gluck what he calls the abandonment of duration, which implies no less the abandonment of place, and making possible any and all combinations projects an absurd and frightening, completely open-ended existence. The Golden Pot is a masterpiece, one which Hoffmann considered his best story. In it, the various ingredients which make up Hoffmann's fictional world are blended with amazing success. It is, at least on one level, the story of an artist who rejects Philistia, not only because fantasy promises escape and greater rewards, but also concomitantly, because the destitute and overwhelmed student Anselmus hardly belongs to this, quote, comfortable, end of quote, world at all. He is a pariah who rips his coat on a nail, loses his hat while bowing, is forever late, and is always breaking things because, he tells us, he, quote, walks straight ahead as if he were a lemming, end of quote. The simile is well chosen. Like a lemming, he is headed for total destruction. The world he ultimately flees to is one of green gold snakes and salamanders, of bronze gold palm trees and marvelous tropical birds who make music as they fly. The stunning, quote, wonderland of Atlantis, end of quote. On this level, Anselmus may be seen as strongly autobiographical, for he represents Hoffmann as he wrestled with the problem of the artistic soul meeting the gross realities head on, and suggests that the world of Philistia can be conquered by the poet, that the denigration and pressure of Philistia recede and disappear under the marvels conjured up by the poetic imagination, and that the poet reaches salvation. But there are other interpretations, the most obvious one being much blacker, for if the prosaic world is so enervating and destructive and intolerable to the poet, he must retreat to the Atlantis he needs for survival. Having retreated, he has renounced his claim to reality and exists only in Atlantis, which of course does not exist at all. Unlike Ritter Gluck, it may not here be a question of simultaneous realities, rather it may be one in which the very identity of the poet is threatened with extinction. Given Anselmus's condition as he barely survives in Dresden, perhaps one can agree that the madness of Hoffmann's artists results primarily from their estrangement from the world and symbolizes the very suffering of the world as it is, in turn. Given Anselmus's condition as he barely survives in Dresden, perhaps one can agree that the madness of Hoffmann's artists results primarily from their estrangement from the world and symbolizes the very suffering of the world as it is, in turn, torments those most sensitive to its pain. Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment reminds us somewhat of Anselmus, as he barely survives in St. Petersburg. Poverty is only one of the reasons for Raskolnikov's estrangement, and it is true that Dostoevsky condemns his Titanism. Yet he too is driven to dream of an Atlantis, albeit one in which love is the primary restorative. Or it has been argued that the story is simply a metaphoric depiction of the development of the artist in which some of the characters represent various projections of mind, the apple woman being fear, and so on. Perhaps Anselmus is himself merely a projection of the registrar, a projection which disappears when the registrar marries Veronica and therefore no longer has a need to exist in a world of fantasy. Or is it that parts of a single character assume individual identities so that Veronica and Serpentina are one, even as Anselmus and the registrar are one? The story contains allegorical possibilities and may well have embedded in it ironical elements which expose to ridicule some contemporaneous German philosophy. But these elements are nebulous and arcane. There are mythic elements as well, at least one of which deserves some mention. The German Romantics, as noted, were concerned with a synthesis, with a conception of man living in perfect harmony and unity with nature. Atlantis perhaps suggests the biblical Eden and paradise before the fall of man, which resulted because thought overcame spirit and soul. Restoration of harmony and paradise may, after all, only be possible through the triumph of faith and ultimately poetry. This is the only one of Hoffmann's many stories dealing with artists which has a happy domestic ending. It may even be said that the bourgeois life depicted in The Golden Pot is not without its rewards, if Veronica is any measure. Yet the ending itself may well be ironical, for even when many of the almost limitless possible interpretations are considered, and the story is read again and again, the final impression is that this world is simply no place for the poet. Quote, be calm, my friend. Do not lament so. Were you not yourself just now in Atlantis? And do you not at least have there a nice little farmstead as a poetic possession of your inner mind? Is the bliss of Anselmus anything else but life and poetry? The poetry to which the sacred harmony of all things is revealed as the most profound secret of nature. However it be interpreted, The Golden Pot is a wondrous product of the romantic imagination. The soft and teasing haze drifting over it is fully in keeping with the time and an author dedicated to illusion. Der Sandmann, the Sandman, is at once one of the more perplexing and successful stories Hoffmann wrote. An interestingly constructed work, it is one of the surprisingly few stories in which evil seems unequivocally to win. The exchange of letters at the beginning is artistically successful in that the reader gains an unobstructed view of Nathaniel and Clara, of Nathaniel as the archetypal romantic and of Clara as the embodiment of love and domestic virtue. But as the story progresses, the mental deterioration of Nathaniel is only sometimes depicted from his point of view. A narrator supplies additional information, but not always evenly, for the narrator is alternately sensitive and sympathetic, and critical and even sardonic. Here, the narrative technique supports the question marks embedded in the fabric of the story because it precludes a clear determination as to how much is happening and how much is imagined. The story may be seen as the projection of a madman's fantasies. Nathaniel's description of his childhood, and there is no reason not to believe him, supplies adequate evidence of several experiences which could have, given his temperament, led to psychosis. Thus viewed, the fantastic events described support the contention that here a childhood trauma, which may have been temporarily suppressed in the subconscious, finally asserts itself and results in distortion and death. Possibly more in keeping with Hoffmann is a reading which sees Coppelius Kapala, if indeed they are one and the same, as a malicious agent of a hostile fate which exists both in Nathaniel's mind and in external reality. Nathaniel is then powerless to ward off this evil, this implacable horror which corrupts and destroys. Is it not this evil force which pushes Nathaniel into irreversible madness when he discovers that the woman he loves is in fact what he is only metaphorically, an automaton? Created by Coppelius, she is no less fate's evil emissary. This may be, at least in part, an archetypal revenge story, for Nathaniel as a child had looked upon what was forbidden and had seen the secrets of the soul. An eye motif runs through the story. There are eyes during the forbidden experiments. Coppelius threatens to remove Nathaniel's eyes. When Olympia is destroyed, her eyes fall out. Coppola is the Italian word for eye socket, and so on. Are the eyes all symbols of Nathaniel's punishment for trespassing? Are they rather merely a symbol for the occult, for magic? It is difficult to determine the degree of Hoffmann's satiric intentions in this story, primarily because the attitude lacks consistency or full development. Yet it is unmistakably present. Nathaniel, on the one hand, a tragic victim of fate, is an absurd romantic as well. Not because he would reach for Atlantis, but because his fervent speeches and his soulful poetry are directed at an automaton who can only respond to, "How profound is your mind? Only you understand me," with a literally mechanical ah. A critic has written perceptively that, quote, "It is possible to give comic expression to the fact that he mistakes a doll for a human being, thinks that she loves him, and confesses his love to her. But Hoffmann's presentation of the matter is so genuinely grotesque that its effect upon us is humorous and horrible at the same time." Wolfgang Kaiser, The Grotesque in Art and Literature. Oh, here's a note that I missed. Note 25. The use of the spyglass, itself an eye, when Nathaniel first sees Olympia, enables him to see her with a clarity not before possible, and it is only when looking at her through the spyglass that her eyes are animated. One of the deeply disturbing aspects of the story has to do with the lens which animates the automaton, but which, when focused on Clara, reduces her to a wooden doll. It is this final vision of Clara which leads directly to Nathaniel's suicide. Nathaniel is no less estranged from reality than Anselmus, and even as in the Golden Pot there is some objective basis for understanding what may be viewed as a flight from reality. In Anselmus' case, his marginal existence is Dresden, and Nathaniel's his traumatic experiences as a child. But one should keep in mind that in Hoffmann, objectified material serves well because it enriches the range of potential interpretations but does not exhaust them. There is nothing in The Sandman which explains, for example, Coppelius' uncanny power over Nathaniel, nor should there be. On any level, Nathaniel is in mortal turmoil. He is a poet possessed by a demon, whether it be internal or external, or both. He is a romantic who carries within himself his own destruction. He must try to reach beyond reality. But having once done so, he may have reached too far ever to be able to return. Besides, Coppelius stands ever ready to block his way.